Appreciate your testimony. I want to mention off the bat that moving forward, I have a lot of hope that this process will play out in a much different way than it has in the past. And part of the reason why I believe that, Mr. Eng, is the gentleman to your right, Mr. Gulliver, who I do have a tremendous amount of respect for, which has been developed over the course of a decade. From my time as a state rep and watching him operate as District 3 Director of MassDOT to today, and his willingness to answer questions, which I quite frankly think sucks, because you two, as you have outlined, really didn't have much responsibility, culpability in the way this process played out previously, but you're called here today to answer the questions of people who did enact that. One of the problems with our political society, I guess, if you will. I am interested in looking back at the past. I may mention one name once. I don't want to scapegoat or draw attention to someone, target someone. That's not my intention. As I mentioned before, my intention is that I want to make sure that this is a better process. Before you entered the room and we were here with the Inspector General, I thought that this is important to investigate back in July of 2025. I had a high school classmate of mine who was the first that made me aware of this. I bumped into him, and he essentially was like, I'm going to lose my job. He happened to be working for one of the other bidders, and he was distraught for multiple reasons, which included his mother having cancer, taking care of her financially, and the prospects of not knowing what his future laid ahead. I think that puts into perspective the human cost of the decisions that we all make, but specifically what happened with this RFP. The millions, if not billions, of potential dollars at stake for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as I previously stated. Highway Administrator Gulliver and I had an exchange during a Ways and Means hearing talking about snow and ice removal, which I've already referenced. We know that it was a bad winter. We know that every dollar matters. And then the last part, which is what bothered me the most, was trust. And I think what bothered me as I started to peel back the layers of this onion was it seemed like this was predetermined, that there had already been a defined outcome before a process ever played out. And it's been raised here, and I understand, it's been said nothing illegal happened. Well, maybe nothing criminal happened. But I do think the specter of being unethical is in question here, which is civil and potential civil violations of the law. The IG report established multiple problems, I think, under Chapter 268A with our codes of conduct for state employees, for conflicts of interest, for unwarranted privileges. And I want to get into that a little bit. But I want to start first with the last RFP proposal, because the thing that struck me square in the face more than anything was that the RFP explicitly outlined that there should be no communication between the applicants and state officials in considering the applications. And the IG's report on page 15 outlines that that was not the case. How is it possible that something like that could happen, that it could go off the rails, and that immediately that the consequence, it said in the RFP, was if that is revealed, the person who is applying is no longer considered. They are disqualified in terms of the RFP. How is that possible?
Well, in the interest of appearance, it should not have happened. My understanding from the IG's report and from the MassDOT's internal review, it was not improper, but it should not have happened. And I get back to the point of everyone that's involved in these procurements knows that perception is important, just as important as a potential conflict. Having said that, in this industry, there may be where a meeting is held on another topic. It needs to be clear that that's not to be discussed. But that's then where we need to make sure when we put someone on the committee in the future that we don't put them in that position where they're doing business with an entity that isn't potentially pursuing these jobs. That's where we're going to make sure on how we select future committee members that we do not allow that to occur, where you're doing regular business and you need to be part of a selection, because that just puts not only the committee member in an awkward spot, it puts the proposers in an awkward spot. So that's part of our new process, looking at how do we do it, and how do we set these committees up where we do not allow anyone to actually have that potential for that conflict.
I'm under the assumption, maybe I'm wrong, that you, as you've taken over, have probably reviewed many of the things that went wrong with this. Is that correct?
We've reviewed a number of different things. A lot of the past review has been done by others.
Have you reviewed the communications between the parties?
I've seen what is in
chairman
the
has-
IG's report.
What's that?
I've seen what's in the IG's report, yes.
So I want to read two communications that were from Apple Green and their agents, if you will, to the chair of the committee process, Mr. Bosworth. And it's very apparent that these communications started in early of 2025, maybe even as soon as November, December of 2024, where it was explicitly not allowed. And the two that stick out to me that I've been given are, "Hi, I hope you're feeling well. Your team did a good job today. Now the work begins." First of all, it's obviously polite to ask someone how you're feeling, but that does establish a pre-existing relationship. And if you go back, there was supposed to be no relationship to begin with, number one. And number two, the real question to me is, complimenting someone who is applying for this as part of this process, what does it mean when it says now the work begins and you're supposed to be objective? How would you answer that? Is this an appropriate communication between an applicant and the person that's hoping to win and judge whether or not they should receive the contract?
I don't know what they were referring to as far as the work begins. I know I would not have had that communication myself.
The other one that stood out to me is, I should have mentioned we and the governor are getting hammered by legislators. We need to jointly plan and administrate a legislative strategy. I mean, have you had conversations with the governor about what happened previously? Obviously, a secretary lost their job over this. At least I'm assuming that's a large portion of the reason. Have you had communications with the governor, the lieutenant governor, on any of these things about what happened and how they're fixed?
I've had conversations about moving forward in terms of how I intend to do business going forward. Not had discussions particularly on past topics like this.
Okay. Moving forward, one of the questions that I raised to the Inspector General is that, it seems that Apple Green willfully violated the RFP by communicating and reaching out and doing so consistently, not through their own company, not just through other people who might be subcontracted in the process, but through lobbyists. Do you think that they should be considered as an applicant in the RFP process that will play out in the months ahead?
I think what will happen is the proposers will submit, and then we'll review their proposals and their eligibility. I don't think it's for me to answer any questions of who is eligible and not eligible going at this point until we see who's interested in pursuing this.
I think it's a little concerning. I think that answer is a little concerning because I think when someone willfully participates and knows that they're, to what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, all the applicants that applied through this RFP process were told you are not to communicate with board members and or the chair. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So one of the things that the IG's report points out is, as part of his recommendations, is that there needs to be, and let me just find it here, employees held to account. And again, I don't want to get into the personalities of this, but what employees have been held to account outside of the secretary? Because when MassDOT responds to the chairman's question of, have you had any communication? And then the answer is no, there's two conclusions. You're either lying or you're unaware. And both are major problems, right? One's a procedural problem, one's a motivation problem, which gets back to, was this predetermined if it was lying? And if it's, the alternative, which they were unaware, then that leads to the conclusion, yes, we have to do better in the process, right? But with Mr. Bosworth, it's my understanding he's still working at the MBTA or MassDOT. And what concerns me is that it says that he is responsible for the P3 initiatives in partnership with Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll's housing and executive development. So it does not seem like the IG recommended that there's been any consequences for this ex parte communication, which to me was a clear violation of the RFP.
Well, that job description, right now, he is not involved in any procurements. That's something that we've done at the MBTA.
But has there been any consequences for anybody else outside of the secretary?
I'm not aware of any other consequences. I mean, the roles that people play have been adjusted. As Jonathan mentioned, going forward, no one involved in the past procurement is on this procurement and selection committee. We think that's an important component to doing things. The other part is, as an agency, it's to make sure we tighten up our procedures, our processes, and our trainings. As an agency, I have to take ownership of how do we make sure we put our employees in a position to succeed. And that's where, the clear direction, the training, the guidance, and the follow-up and the oversight that we're going to have. That's what I need to be doing.
So if we're going to look forward, which quite frankly I'm happy to do right now, do you know who will be leading the RFP process? We've heard who gets to appoint the members. Would you walk us through that just one more time? And you had said people previously involved will not be involved. Does that scale all the way down to the employees that I'm sort of indicating here that I think were problematic and don't seem to have faced any consequences?
So to answer your question, Senator, the answer is yes. It does scale all the way down for starters. As far as who is managing the team and how we're doing it, the team that was brought in to implement the last procurement. So after the award, we started into implementation stage. That was the time that I started getting involved after the board voted to award the contract. The team that managed that process, so our Chief Operating Officer, Megan Haggerty, and Andy Paul, who was in our Chief Engineer's office, are respectively handling the issuance of this new procurement. Megan is the program manager, Andy is the project manager, and that means that they're separated by technical. In the case of Andy in our Chief Engineer's office, he's handling putting together with our legal team the actual documents, the RFP. He's been responsible for pulling together all the technical specifications. Because this is not our typical construction project, as I mentioned earlier, it does contain that lease arrangement. It does a P3. Megan's role as Chief Operating Officer is to bring the rest of the agency, rest of MassDOT together to be working on this, whether they're in legal or real estate or in engineering, and make sure that everybody is working together to get this RFP out the right way. Andy, by the way, will also be serving as because of his experience as Deputy Chief, he has a lot of procurements under his belt. He will be serving of the selection committee on the technical side. He'll be serving as the non-voting chair of that technical committee, and part of his role is to make sure that everybody fully understands the criteria that's being put forward for that selection, and that people are filling out the forms as they need to, and again, correcting a lot of the stuff that the Inspector General was alluding to in his report.
So one note on that point, because I had asked the Inspector General about this, and I think he said that I maybe misinterpreted what he said, and maybe you can clarify. It's my understanding that pretty much every state employee goes through a conflict of interest training. You have done it, we have done it, everyone has done it. But he insinuated or said that the board members that went through this process did not take that training. Can you comment upon that? Is that true? Are you unaware?
I'm not certain on that. We can check. I I am pretty sure that our board members, MassDOT board members, do take the training, but we hear that loud and clear, and the Inspector General's report, as you read through it on the conflict of interest piece, was taken to heart by us. And we have our industry day coming up on this project. I think it's equally important to remind the bidders that they have an obligation to not contact our staff involved in procurement as well. And we're gonna be taking that extra step and making sure they know it. And we are going to be giving additional training to our staff participating in this as well, given the sensitivity of this one.
I think one of the things that the IG said that really kind of put a question in my mind was about maybe the outcome of this is we need to better define our ethics laws and what a conflict of interest is, or the appearance of a conflict. And I'm pretty sure if you read Mass General Law 268A, it's pretty clear what those are. And I think what bothers a lot of people when it comes to state government is, is it that the law needs to be more properly defined, or is it a question of the application? And that is something that really is something we need to get our hands around at some point, maybe dig even further, which leads me to my last question. Is there anything in this RFP process that you believe should be referred to the State Ethics Committee, or perhaps to, someone in the Attorney General's Civil Division or the U.S. Attorney's Civil Division, to ensure that something like this never happens again?
You're referring to the prior RFP, correct?
Correct.
I believe, and I'm going to look to counsel here, I believe some of this was referred to the Ethics Commission, correct? Right.
Okay. Thank you.